So welcome, Izzy. It's really a pleasure to meet you. My name is Corey Hunter, as of course a number of our viewers know, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Izzy from California. So I'll be honest, I'm a little bit jealous of the weather down there right now because today was rainy and cold. It wasn't too nice. And looking ahead to our interview, I was thinking, oh my goodness, it's probably so nice where Izzy is.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's actually been getting a lot darker sooner around here, especially in the part of California where I live. But there's like 3 feet of snow in my hometown. So it's like, yeah, it could be worse, I guess.
I know there's been some places not too far from here getting snow, and I'm just waiting for it to start showing up around us. So it's not far away. But I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm really excited to share with my viewers about some of your YouTube content and talk about what you're creating, and also talk about some interesting topical things that we do with Canadian gender equity, and talking about how that relates to your content too. So I guess maybe we can get started by just hearing a little bit about who you are and what you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, so my name is Izzy Christenson. I was born and raised in Juneau, Alaska, and then I recently moved to California like a year ago. I was intending to be with my mom and grandma temporarily until I was able to try to find housing of my own and fly away from the nest, as it were. And I'm just now kind of like getting around to actually doing that. So that part's been interesting. But yeah.
It's really cool. And I've never been to Alaska, but I've been told it's really beautiful up there.
It does have some really nice scenery when the weather wants to be good.
I think that's something we can relate to. The weather's not always too compliant up north.
Yeah.
So like normally I wouldn't be so bold as to put somebody on the spot and ask people point blank about their gender identity and their gender expression. I'm really big on respectfully asking people about their pronouns and introducing my own as well. But I mean, the point of this interview, we both agreed it's a lot about visibility. So I myself am a transgender female, a transgender individual. And I was hoping that you might be able to elaborate to our audience a little bit about your own gender identity and expression and what that journey's been like for you.
Yeah, I am also a transgender individual, specifically a non-binary trans woman. May or may not be a gender fluid. Honestly, I've been feeling kind of weird lately, but my pronouns are she and they. And my journey, I always figured that I was supposed to be like some flavor of queer even when I was a little kid, even though like I didn't like really confront it until I was in high school. In fact, I didn't really like learn that much about trans people like that until I started using Tumblr in high school, because you know what little I did know about trans people beforehand was just kind of a very the information had a very a heteronormative kind of view. So I might have just been like, oh, these people exist, that's cool, whatever. It couldn't be me though. But then I came out to my father as bisexual in high school, my senior year specifically. And I started doing what I considered cross-dressing more often. And ever since then, I've been shifting through like a lot of different types of queer identities. Like I thought I was a gay cis man, or I thought I was, you know, a pansexual woman. What's my point? Oh yeah. And in regards to transitioning specifically, like physically at least, I had been trying to get on that since 2017. I did not come out to my mother in the best way necessarily, but every we had like several arguments surrounding it since then, so it would result in me like getting overwhelmed and frustrated and just giving up transitioning entirely for a few months at a time until I felt like I could no longer be in the closet, and then I tried to transition again, and then we would argue again, and then I go back into the closet, and it just kept happening until like late June of this year is when I finally, well, I actually tried starting hormone replacement therapy twice this year, but then I officially restarted it in late June of this year, and am trying my best to see it through this time. So I've been noticing some very like subtle changes as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, I was just saying that hormone replacement therapy can be really challenging. There's a lot of people might not know this, but there can be physical side effects, and it's really challenging too when you don't have support.
Yeah. Thankfully, my dad has been very supportive. My mom has tried to be as supportive as she can, but she is more of a boomer about the whole thing than my dad is. But, you know, I always say boomer is like more of a mindset than an actual age demographic. So,
Well, and at least she's making an effort though, and I think that's a big part of the first steps, right? Like is trying to push yourself out of the box. And sometimes it takes people longer maybe to,
yeah, or multiple times to try to get them on your side.
Yeah, it takes a little while. You got to try to pop the bubble a few times maybe before you get in there. But you've mentioned that you're doing the hormones now, and you're feeling confident, and you're starting to notice some subtle changes. So I just want to say congratulations for that.
Thank you.
You know, you mentioned kind of getting out and getting some of your own space. So congrats on that too, because that really makes a difference, I think.
Yeah, I'm currently living with my partner and a roommate who is a friend of hers. So
Nice.
That's where the cats come in. It's just
Well, do you know what? Like I've got a cat right here on my lap, so you won't get any arguments from me. We're all about the cat in this household. So
yeah, my cat is further away from me right now, but
if she comes around though, make sure you get her up and say hello.
okay.
So I know we mentioned earlier that you were a YouTuber, and for those that might not be familiar, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what it is you do on YouTube and what kind of content it is that you're creating and doing there. I'm really curious to hear more about that too.
Yeah, the content I create is specifically categorized as YouTube poop, which is a subculture of kind of a video remix culture that had its roots on a website called Sheezy Art in 2004 when a person called Super Yoshi uploaded this video centered around the Super Mario World cartoon. And then when YouTube started to become a thing a little later in the mid 2000s, people actually started uploading more stuff there, and they started using more different sources and kept using more advanced video editors than just Windows Movie Maker. So, you know, all the effects and such advanced as well at the time. But what it actually is, it is basically a remix of any audiovisual media that you can get a digital copy of. And they take it and they put in all these usually pretty crude jokes and like these very loud video and audio effects. Like they'll have they might like swirl characters' faces around, or, you know, chop up some of the dialogue to make them say different things than they originally said in the source. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
So, and I have been mildly famous in the community since I want to say 2008, and I mainly got famous for excuse me, making a bunch of videos that used different episodes of Blue's Clues. which was one of my personal childhood favorites as well. So
I might love Blue's Clues. I'm not gonna lie.
yes.
Oh, I'm gonna have to go back and find those ones. I haven't seen those ones yet, but now I have something to put on my watch list.
Okay then.
No, that's really cool. And so I'm a bit curious too about how your gender identity has influenced your work on YouTube, because as you mentioned, it's kind of that's been a bit of a journey for you, and you've had some ups and downs there. And yeah, I'm curious to know how that relates to your presence on YouTube.
As far as like directly influencing the work itself, I've lately been putting a lot more just jokes relating to gender and sexuality in my videos. Like in this 9-minute Alice in Wonderland video I made, there was a part towards the end where I had the Mad Hatter say, "I was home taking tea," and then he squirts like a trans flag laser into his teacup. Or like how I might have a quick little clip of Steve from Blue's Clues drinking like a cup of orange juice, but I'll caption it, "Me, girl dick," stuff like that. But also with the Q&A, that specifically came from me just wanting to, well, I had actually already put my face to the name because I was pretending to be my father actually on the channel for the first few years of the channel's inception, and that's a whole long story there. So then I scripted out Q&A videos for him to perform, and he was a very good sport about the whole thing, oddly enough. But then eventually I realized I couldn't really keep that up, so then I started putting out Q&As with my own face on there. And now, and then just recently with the latest Q&A I did, I felt like I wanted to incorporate this particular chapter of my life, or this, part of my identity into my work. And overall, I think it helps to like put a face to the name, or especially for any of my subscribers who might be newer to the channel. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And then how have people responded to you since, you've shown them this next part of your life, this next chapter?
It has been mostly pretty positive. I have had to lose a few people, of course, like people who were being either just outright transphobic or who weren't really like vibing with my content anymore. Like in the announcement video I did for my latest Q&A, like it's unlisted now, but I literally included a clip from the first SpongeBob movie. "Don't think we don't know how to weed them out," but yeah, even with that in mind, some of things people have told me have kind of, messed with my mental health, but, it just helps to remember that the overall response has been more positive than negative, and I do still have, friends who support me outside of YouTube, as well as my viewers who are understanding and accepting of my identity. So.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes those negative voices, they can be really loud, and they can really hurt and sting. But like you said, it's important to remember that a big majority has been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm really happy to hear that. It can be scary, I think. I know it was for me when I started putting out my first couple of YouTube videos, what people might say, because there is a little bit of security when you're behind the shroud of your computer, right? That you can just say and do things and be a little less accountable. And so it can be a little scary, and I'm glad that it's been positive. I'm glad you put yourself out there. And I'm really glad that, like I said, it's been good. That's awesome.
Thank you. It has been like it did feel a little scary at first, just because of how a lot of people still perceive trans people, and honestly, just to say it, want us dead, you know. But still, yeah, it's good to find actual support.
Mm. Do you find that there's a lot of active homophobia and transphobia around where you are, either like in your community or online in some of the channels that you visit?
Um, I well, I have been lucky to not have to deal with a lot of very vocal homophobia in real life. There were like a couple of instances I had in my hometown that were a little weird, but you know, I do feel like it may be a little more amplified online to some extent, and that's not to jump ahead too much, but that's one thing I want to do with my channel, is to just have it be kind of a safe place for people like me, at least with my most recent content moving forward. So yeah, another point I was going to make. Yeah.
That's all right. So no, I definitely think that's cool too, because like you say, it can be amplified online. So it's important to have safe online spaces. I think that's really, really important for us right now, especially at a time when people might be more isolated. You know, we're spending more time at home. So, you know, we're online more. And so we need safe online spaces. Um, and
And actually, oh, no, sorry to cut you off
go
again,
for
but
it. You got it.
I do remember the point I was going to make now, is that I do also want to try to make the YouTube poop community in general a little safer for people like me, because a lot of people, I brought this up briefly in my Q&A as well, but there have been a lot of people who have gone for like shock humor or jokes based around slurs, and I've been a dumb high school edgelord, so I engaged in some of it in the past. But you know, I grew up and realized how words can affect people. So, not that outside of that, I don't know if I've seen a lot of like super rampant homophobia in the YouTube community specifically, aside from the subscribers I've had to lose. But I guess I would just like to ensure that it's not a thing, you know?
Yeah. I definitely get that. And there can be, I imagine in this kind of humor or in any kind of comedy or genre of humor, really, there's always the risk for offending people and using, you know, jokes and like you say, things that might be slur-based or offensive-based as shock humor. And to a certain degree, you know, we tolerate certain things and that's all right. But like you say, we don't want the jokes to be hateful and to make people feel uncomfortable in their space. And so I think it's really cool to be taking that proactive, you know, mindset of making sure that there's going to be safe spaces out there. There's going to be places where there aren't really offensive jokes. It's not going to be full of slurs, or it's not going to be full of anything. And we need to support more than one community. I think that's really important too. Like, you know,
Yeah.
as a transgender person, I realized that yes, I have a number of risks in my life, but I also have a number of privileges. You know, I work in a good job in a college. I'm comfortable financially. I have a nice home. I've got my pets. I'm a Caucasian individual, and there's a lot of privilege that comes with being white.
Mm-hmm.
Even with being a very feminine individual, with being transgender, I'm very passable, as people might call it, in a number of situations, and even that has its privileges. You know, still fitting within that binary structure to a certain degree. So I think it's really, really important for us to kind of come together and create visibility for a lot of other people as well, and to use those privileges to connect and support one another. Something that I've been trying to be very mindful of, like we put out a little picture today on our Instagram, and it has the pride flag, and there's a circle in the middle with the trans colors, and then there's the fist, and it's in like a brown kind of color. And it's to symbolize that, you know, Black lives matter, trans lives matter, and Black trans lives matter. Because there's risks to being Black and there's risks to being transgender, and we need to support people holistically, right? So
yeah. And although one positive side effect of my coming out is that I have had some of my viewers comment on the Q&A video telling me that they are some form of queer or non-binary or trans or whatever, and they, you know, appreciate my coming out, and I just love that feeling, you know, just like, yeah, connecting with other people like that. So
yeah, visibility can be inspiring, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I for me, I something you said earlier on in our conversation really resonated with me. You know, I live in a small town, is where I'm from, and I didn't see a lot of variation in gender expression and sexual orientation growing up. And it wasn't until I kind of got out there and I started seeing things that I hadn't come in contact with that I started realizing the world was so much different than the little bubble that I'd been living in before. And you know, it was much like what you said earlier. I kind of knew a definition of transgender, but it was one of those, oh, but that can't be me. Like, it's so far removed and it was so far out there until I actually got out there. And what really triggered me was seeing someone I knew from high school on Facebook who had transitioned. I had no idea. And then all of a sudden there was a picture of them and they were presenting as the opposite gender. And it just made it so close to home, and it made it so real. I was like, wow, this isn't just a word and a definition. This is actually, you know, an option. There's a journey here. Like this, you know, I've thought that it sounds relatable before, but I also thought it was impossible, and it was so far out there. And I think that's the inspiration that visibility can provide. People realize that there's possibility out there, and it gives a bit of hope.
Yeah, I've had trans friends from high school as well on Facebook start to be a little more vocal about their identity, and and just talking to them about that has helped me a lot. I would say even people who are trans who I didn't know, who were like a friend of a friend, or I even knew one trans man in person in like my senior year of high school. I don't remember how much we like talked about his identity, but yeah, I think just like seeing that there are actual people who belong to this subset of the community really kind of like cements and seeing the individuality among them as well. Like, you know, my mom talks about how she would always like go out to North Hollywood or whatever and party with a bunch of people, and so she's met trans people, but like that was all in the 70s. So the trans community back then, with all due respect, is not the same as the trans community now. So
no, you're right, it's very different. Very different. Do you feel like YouTube on a whole has been a very accepting place for the LGBTQ and queer community?
Yeah, I feel like it has its little pockets where LGBT creators can kind of like thrive, and if you just kind of stick to those, your experience will probably be tolerable. But if it can get like really risky if they get any exposure like outside of that, because there was the beauty channel on YouTube, Nikki something or other, who I don't recall the details of the entire situation, but didn't she like get blackmailed into coming out as trans basically? So
I don't know all the details around it, but I'd heard something about it at the time a little bit, and she was outed in some capacity.
She was out in some capacity, yeah.
Either blackmail or she'd been forced to come out, or it's had something similar to that.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so there's
and
risk.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of applies to other corners of the internet as well. Like, you said you were coming out with a TikTok, and how I mentioned that LGBT TikTok is, at least for me, it's more tolerable to watch than straight TikTok, honestly. So,
Oh, and that's positive to know too, because again, like there's always that risk of negative media and hateful comments. Sometimes people feel really comfortable at home behind their computer, and it's nice to know that there's safe spots. I think there's still going to be risks. Like every once in a while, we get negative pushback and comments. Like you said, you did have some people that some followers that left, but overall, I think it's becoming a more and more positive place every day. And I think visibility has a lot to do with that too, right? It helps to make the place more inclusive. People sometimes take for granted that you can go to a store and see people on cards that look like you, and that you turn on the TV and you see people that look like you in the commercials, and that everybody walking down the street reflects you and your family structure. And people take those little privileges for granted. And I think visibility helps to make the world more inclusive, more open minded, and it helps us to realize that there's more diversity out there than we sometimes might initially pick up on.
yeah. And going back to what you said just now about negative media, I think having more, like, of course, positive representation specifically, and like diverse representation as well, helps, because I see this problem a lot with people who are branded as SJWs. Like, they take people who like do commentaries on them will take these very extreme radical like situations, like the video of that one woman with the red hair who crashed that lecture that the guy was giving at that college, and they'll just act like that's all there is to this group of people, when really this is just like the most extreme end of the spectrum, you know?
Yeah. Well, we polarize after too long, right? Too much of them and us,
Yeah.
and you get those extremists, and they don't line up with everybody's view. Um, but yeah, it has an impact. Not a good one.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, positive media, that's going to be part of the key to the solution, I think, right? Outweighing the negative with the good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why, kind of go building off that, why do you think visibility is important in a more general sense, and also in particular for the YouTube community and your particular brand within the YouTube community?
Well, in general, it just helps to know that if you're a questioning queer youth, that you're not alone. There's other people who look like you or think like you, yeah, or might be able to help you with certain aspects of your identity. And yeah, in my particular, in the YouTube community, there isn't really like, the only other, excuse me, big name out there who is visibly a trans woman is The Things, who she makes really good content as well. But like, for the most part, it is, well, I think there may be like one other trans girl out there, but for the most part, it is like a bunch of cis, straight, usually white males. There may be some like cis bisexuals or whatever who I don't know about yet, but even if they do have like a different type of sexuality or whatever, they might not like talk about it that openly, or at least not put it into their videos, So it's like, and again, like I said in my Q&A video, it just hammers home the fact that, we are everywhere, including places you might not expect.
Yes, and I love that as well. Like, that's one thing I enjoy chatting about in some of my talks. Like, people might not expect a college professor to be a transgender individual. Some of the people that I've worked with before include a grade 2 student. Some people might not expect a grade 2 student to be a transgender youth.
Some
Um,
people might not expect their friends to be trans, you know?
yeah, or a family member of theirs, a cousin or an aunt or an uncle. But they're people in our community in all sorts of different positions, roles, ages. I think that's such a great point to make, Izzy. Such a great point.
Thank you.
How can people get involved and support? What are your thoughts around that? Like supporting endeavors like yours and mine, where we're trying to create visibility and we're trying to help the transgender and the non-binary communities and YouTube and within our communities. What kind of recommendations do you have for people?
Um, well, if you want to help on a very like basic financial level, I suppose, if you can try donating to an LGBT charity or an organization that you feel is doing good work. Or if you can just directly support me financially. I have a Ko-fi page where I take requests for sources for my videos, and also I take commissions for editing like more regular YouTube videos. So, you know, gotta get that plug. And try to see if there are any like protests in your area that I guess reflect your values, and try to get connected with organizations and do it, you know, safely, of course. If you do want to go to a march or a demonstration or whatever, you know, wear a mask, obviously. I haven't been able to recently, because I think there just aren't that many demonstrations in my part of California right now where I am. And even in Los Angeles, where I was living previously, there was a lot more stuff happening, at least in vicinities where I could drive to, but I still didn't go that often because I was worried about the coronavirus and
Yeah.
just a bunch of other stuff happening at home. But if you are a student, you could see if your school has a gay straight alliance or something to that effect, or ask what they're doing to help support queer and trans youth. And that's about all I can think of right now. So
No, and those are fantastic suggestions. And something you said kind of reminded me of something else too. That some areas aren't having as many demonstrations or pride events or different awareness campaigns. Something I've just recently started stumbling across were some of these things starting to happen online. And the cool thing about that is being able to connect to things that are geographically really far away from us, but we can still be a part of it. So recently, probably about 3 or 4 hour drive from here, there's a center that did an online event where they had collected videos from different people, including myself, about sexual violence and domestic violence. And so people were talking about how it affected them. And I did a little piece on the unique gender struggles facing the transgender and the non-binary community relating to domestic violence, because there are different risk factors there than there are with cisgendered individuals. So, you know, little things like that. It streamed online. People were able to tune in and be a part of that premiere on Facebook. It was super accessible. And I've noticed some of these things are starting to pop up a little bit more. So that's just something I'd like to build off that, because I think your idea of supporting and being an ally and joining those protests is wonderful. And you're also very correct. There might not be as many happening, but you know, maybe the more we can look around online, we might be able to still find ways to connect with some of those things.
Yeah.
So I mean, are there any other final messages or any other thoughts you'd like to share? This has been a wonderful conversation, by the way.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well. Black trans lives matter, and yeah. Other than that, I'm not really not sure if I have any like final messages. If you want, you can check out my channel at youtube.com/user/fishtitan64. That's FISHTITAN numeric 64.
I gotta say, one of my students said I was cool today when they learned that I was interviewing you. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm cool again. It's probably been a decade since I've been cool. Like, this is exciting.
That is sweet. Did they already know about my work, or?
Well, they might have. I should have asked directly, but they're really into YTP culture, and so I mentioned your link, and they're like, oh yeah, and then they were literally going on their phone to your channel while we were talking and checking things out, and they were commenting on how excited they were to check it out because it was right up their alley for humor. So. You know, for people who like that kind of content, I really highly recommend they check it out because I understand that you're pretty funny. So
thank you.
You're welcome. And then I'm just going to do my own shameless little plug, just in case any of your viewers are checking this video out that haven't met me. I'd love you to come and check out the other educational little pieces. We got little bites that are 10 and 12 minutes long. They're really insightful. I've also got other conversations with a lot of interesting people. I've interviewed a minister recently, as well as other transgender individuals from the community, talking about all sorts of different things. And I'd love you to come and check it out. So, and you can just easily find us at Canadian Gender Equity. And I'll warn you now, for some reason, YouTube likes to change the word equity to equality, but it is Canadian Gender Equity. And I'll tell you now, there's a big difference between equality and equity. You try giving everyone a pair of size 10 shoes and see how well that goes versus giving everyone a pair of shoes that fit. Big difference. So
exactly.
Canadian Gender Equity. But thank you so much for your time today, Izzy. Like I said, it's just been a blast to chat with you, and it's so nice to connect with people that are around North America going through similar things that also recognize how important it is for us to create positive visibility for our community. So just thank you.
And thank you again for having me. I've felt very positively about this conversation. So.
Awesome. Well, you have a wonderful night, and I'm going to look forward to chatting with you sometime soon, and I'll make sure to send you along the video links too.